Sir William Cash.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Supreme Court, Mr. Speaker, mentioned that the prorogation had...
Order. I apologise for interrupting the honourable gentleman, but he too... Order. The honourable gentleman must be heard. I want to hear his question and the answer to it. Sir William Cash.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Supreme Court mentioned that the prorogation had an extreme effect upon the fundamentals of our democracy. Does my right honourable friend accept that it is more than an extreme and undemocratic effect for Parliament itself to tear up its own Standing Order 14 because the priority of that Standing Order gives to government business as compared to private members' business, such as the Surrender Act, derives exclusively from the fundamental democracy of the voters of this country in general elections, and to remedy this, they must be given an early general election to decide who governs this country.
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend, and he is of course quite right in the sense that the people of this country can see all kinds of forces in this country going to quite extraordinary lengths, whether judicial or parliamentarian, to prevent Brexit from being delivered on October the 31st. But I have to tell my honourable friend, and I'm sure he will agree with me, we are not going to be deterred by such ruses, and we are going to get it done.
Jay Swinson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is not serious. He needs to understand that actions have consequences. Even my 5-year-old knows that if you do something wrong, you have to say sorry. If my son can apologise for kicking a football indoors, surely the Prime Minister can have the humility to say sorry for misleading the Queen, misleading the country, and illegally shutting down our democracy.
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think quite frankly, one of the actions for which the Right Honourable Lady might wish to take responsibility was writing to the President of the European Commission, actively encouraging him not to do a deal with this country.
Sir Patrick McLaughlin.
As somebody who voted Remain in the referendum, I'm mindful of the fact that this House of Commons voted 6-1 in favour of having a referendum. On 2 occasions, the Prime Minister has attempted to call the general election, which would have taken place on the 15th of October. If the British people, where we get our mandate from, had decided there should have been another Prime Minister for that occasion, they would have had the opportunity. Why was that stopped?
Prime Minister.
My right honourable friend who speaks with great wisdom and with great experience of this place, but I cannot believe in all his time here he has ever seen a leader of the opposition actively forego and turn down, in full view of the British public, the opportunity to have a general election. But that is what has happened twice, and there can only be one possible explanation: that he doesn't think he can win.
Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There will be many people, not least the families of senior judges, who were murdered in Northern Ireland, many of them, including the Lord Justice of Appeal, who will wish that the leader of the opposition, when he supported a terrorist organisation that murdered judges, had really put those words into action much, much earlier in his career. When we talk about respect for the rule of law, it should have been respect for the rule of law through the decades of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. On Brexit, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that despite everything, the fundamentals remain unchanged, that we need to deliver on the Brexit referendum, but that we must do so ideally and, if possible, with a deal, and we want to get that deal through this House. So would he agree that the way to do that is to deal with the anti-democratic backstop, the trap that he talks about, the issue of consent? We will work with him on those issues. But that all the shenanigans in this House undermining the leverage of the Prime Minister is actually in danger of bringing about the very result that some who say they don't want a no deal will actually achieve.
Prime Minister.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for what he has just said, and of course I agree with him profoundly in his condemnation of terrorism. I make no comment on the support of the right honourable gentleman opposite for those organisations, because I've made that point many times before. But on his point about the negotiations, he is, I think, speaks with great maturity on this issue, because there is a chance to make progress. It will not be easy, but it clearly is not helped by the Surrender Act. But I think that neither he nor I, and that's what it is, because it would require us to take no deal off the table, neither he nor I are going to be daunted by that act. And I think that our confidence is growing, and we will work flat out to get a deal by October the 17th, and then, Mr. Speaker, this House will indeed have a chance to pronounce on it, as it was always intended that it should.
Mr. Jeremy Hunt.
Can I congratulate my right honourable friend on becoming Prime Minister, and I hope he's enjoying doing the job as much as I'm enjoying not doing the job. Does he agree that those who claim to defend parliamentary democracy are in fact putting it at grave risk by alienating a large proportion of the population who fear that this House is trying to block a democratic referendum result that we promised to honour?
Well said. It is a great pleasure to respond to my right honourable friend, because I'm reminded of the many times that he and I shared a platform, and frankly we spoke absolutely as one, Mr. Speaker, on that issue. He was right then and he is right now.
Mr. Hilary Benn.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, can I say to the Prime Minister that those of us who voted for the European Union Withdrawal No. 2 Act make no apology whatsoever for having legislated to prevent the Prime Minister from taking this country out of the European Union on the 31st of October without an agreement. And the Prime Minister can shout as much as he likes from the dispatch box, but he cannot hide the fact he has no mandate, no majority and no credibility. Now, Mr. Speaker, on the 3rd of September, the Prime Minister told the House that he would bring forward proposals for an alternative to the backstop well before the end of the 30-day deadline set by Chancellor Merkel. That deadline has now passed. The EU says no such formal proposals have been tabled. Why not, and when will he do so?
Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman, I think, will agree that the Surrender Act had a material, the Hilary Benn Surrender Act, Mr. Speaker, did indeed have a profound psychological impact on our friends and partners over the Channel, and it has had an impact on the negotiations, and it has made things more difficult. And I think, in all honesty, I think he would concede that. But on the detail of the negotiations at present, Mr. Speaker, all I can say is that we have tabled proposals, as the right honourable gentleman who spoke from the DUP benches just now has confirmed. Progress is being made. It is not assisted by publishing our proposals today.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister is very keen to point out how to deliver commitments made during an election. He wrote to the One Nation group during his election to be party leader that he was not much attracted to prorogation, something that he may reflect on now, and that he would seek to build consensus across the House. What undermines his negotiating position is that those watching from Europe cannot see how the Prime Minister is going to deliver a majority in this House for concessions that he will get. Can he update the House on the moves that he's taking to build consensus?
I thank the honourable lady, and actually, I think she asked, Mr. Speaker, she asked an extremely important question, because I do think that in all intellectual honesty, the members opposite who voted for the Ben Burke Act, who wanted to take a no deal off the table, who voted for the Surrender Act, should vote for the deal that we produce. Logically, and I'd like to hear from them that they will, Mr. Speaker. We will, I'm very confident, make progress towards getting a deal, and I hope it will command their support.
Yvette Cooper.
Earlier today, the Attorney General did not just say that he would respect the Supreme Court's judgment, he also said, we got it wrong. The Prime Minister has today just said the opposite and effectively said he thinks it's okay for a Prime Minister to cancel Parliament for as long as he so chooses in order to not to answer questions. Many of us have had disagreements with his predecessors, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, David Cameron, John Major, Margaret Thatcher, but none of them would have done this. None of them would have been so chaotic, none of them would have shown such disregard for the rule of law or tried to concentrate power in their own hands by cancelling Parliament in this way. Why is he so entitled that he thinks it's one rule for one person and one rule for him and a different one from everyone else?
Mr. Speaker, I think the historical record will reflect that several Prime Ministers, and I think all Prime Ministers, have had prorogations, and John Major, for instance, prorogued for several weeks, I think, in advance of an election. But on her substantive question about the view of my right honourable lady colleague, the Attorney General, about the judgment yesterday, let's be clear that we are as one in respecting the Supreme Court, and we are as one in thinking that judgment was wrong.
Mr. M. Patterson.
We're told in the general election 2015, during the passage of the referendum bill in this House, during the referendum itself, that we, the MPs, would give them the decision. It would be a final decision, and whatever the result was, we, the MPs, would honour it. Right. The crisis we have is the first time ever the people have not obediently and politely gone along with what the establishment wanted. We've seen the political establishment in this House, the commercial establishment, and now the judicial establishment go against the will of the people. They are angry, they feel thwarted by the establishment. Does the Prime Minister agree that the only answer is to leave on...
Order, the Right Honourable Order! Mr. Patterson, the Right Honourable Gentleman is well, he persisted, but the Right Honourable Gentleman was entitled to be fully heard. I hope he's content. But I was trying to help the Right Honourable Gentleman. I did my best to help the Right Honourable Gentleman. Go on, blurt out the last sentence, man.
Will the Prime Minister agree with me that the only way to resolve this crisis is to leave the European Union on the 31st of October by taking back control, leaving the customs union, leaving the single market, and leaving the remit of the ECJ, as we promised in our election manifesto?
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to you for making sure that last sentence was heard, because I agree with every word of it, and that is exactly what we are going to do.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Earlier today, parents in Walthamstow contacted me extremely concerned about the content of a presentation about the Prime Minister's proposals and Brexit that had been broadcast on what it transpires to be 3,000 digital notice boards of primary schools around this country without the prior consent of the schools. Given the amount of money this government is spending on Brexit adverts, can he at least reassure Walthamstow residents that in this instance it wasn't his doing, and give his personal pledge that our primary schools will remain Brexit propaganda-free zones?
Obviously, I think the honourable lady is bringing me news about what schools in her constituency. What I can tell her, and what I think colleagues would like to hear, is that we're investing more in every primary school in this country by levelling up across the UK.